Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. My guest today is Dallas Alexander. So Dallas is a musician, but he's also kind of famous for being the JTF2 guy who had the longest sniper shot. And so that's how most people know him. But we'll get to know Dallas a little bit better here today. So Dallas, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
So, before we kind of get into it and I, start firing some questions at you, just give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, like we were just discussing, in Alberta, Canada. Played hockey my whole life, joined the military. Now I'm a songwriter. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, most of the time anyway. I tour a lot and still get back and forth to Canada. I'm a father, children, and a lover of life.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'm super pumped to chat with you today. There's got a few different questions that I want to ask you, but the first one is, what inspired you to really join the military in the first place?
I think at the time I was just finishing playing hockey, so I was done junior hockey, and it was kind of a decision point if I wanted to go try and play pro or semi-pro somewhere.
Where'd you play your junior?
All over the place. I played in the Manitoba Junior League for a little bit. I played a couple different junior B leagues in Alberta, and I ended playing in a junior league in Michigan.
Okay.
And then I worked in the oil field on the rigs like you do in Alberta on the off season to decide what I was going to do next, and that's where I learned about JTF2, which is our special operations unit, and it was just something that checked a whole bunch of boxes for me where I was instantly like, holy shit, that's what I got to go do. I think a lot of it, being a young man, was, like I said, it was kind of a decision point in my life. It was, adventure and enough mystery and enough kind of badass to it where I was like, that's what I want to do. And it kind of had the way I looked at it was, like the team aspect of what I loved about being on a hockey team, the adversity and the challenge and all of that stuff. So at first it was just me being like, that sounds really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I get it though. Cause that's, why a lot of people still play hockey, these days, even their 40s, 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
they just like being in, the room with the boys. Obviously, exercise is a big part of it too, but just that camaraderie kind of, feeling and
Totally.
what you do get in the room, playing hockey. And then, obviously, you get that in the military as well. Like, I don't know, because I wasn't in the military, but from the people that I chat with, they seem to still keep in touch with, a lot of their vet buddies, maybe not, all the time, because, they do obviously disperse and that kind of thing after, but, a lot of them, sometimes I find they even connect after, like 5 or 10 years, they haven't spoken to one another, but, as soon as they start talking to them, things go basically back to normal or back to baseline, just because, they have that kind of like special bond. So, that's definitely seems to be, one of the cooler aspects or beneficial aspects of being in the military. So for yourself, like, what was your favorite aspect of being in it overall?
I think that changed. I think it evolved. As a younger dude, I'll say, it really was the challenge, the sense of adventure, the camaraderie, that stuff. As I spent some time in the unit and deployments and all that stuff, really my favorite part became deploying and, quite frankly, killing bad guys.
Well, that's what we need, right? That's kind of what the bottom line of the military is, defeat the enemy so that, we're protected from the enemy. So, I appreciate the service and everything that you did there. One thing that I did want to ask you about today was, so I've worked with veterans for, probably close to, 10 years now in my practice. Mostly through the use of cannabis, which maybe we'll get into later. But in terms of like PTSD, I remember Tim Kennedy had this kind of famous-ish post that he had, from, he probably made it, I don't know, close to 10 years ago, saying that, he's done this things, he's seen, horrible things, and yet he doesn't basically suffer from any PTSD at all. And so in terms of your opinion, like, why do some guys get PTSD in the military and why do some guys not?
I think that's a really long answer. I think a lot of it starts with most things that are projected in your adult life start with how you were raised and what your childhood was like. And if you process things, that had happened to you that were maybe not so favorable, or if you didn't have anything happen to you. I think a lot of stuff starts with childhood and how you're raised. But also I think getting into the military, I don't think enough people, in my opinion, put in the work to realize how serious of a job it is. And by that, I mean prepping your mind to deal with stuff, prepping your mind to see things that are not normal walking around, Canada or the US. And then processing as stuff happens. So I specifically put a lot of effort into just every tool I could find, from meditation to fitness to journaling to all kinds of stuff, to process what was happening day to day overseas or at home. And like, we would go do a hit and I would come back and do like a candle meditation. We're not the first generation of people to fight wars. There's information from all kinds of warrior cultures on how to be in peacetime and how to prep for war. And I think that there's not a big enough focus on the tools to process, the tools to handle this kind of stuff and come out on the tail end and be able to sit peacefully with your family.
And so, we'll get into maybe some of the techniques that you're using, but were you using those techniques even before you joined the military, like in preparation, and or was it something that you sort of developed when you joined the military after? Yeah,
a little bit of both. So in preparation is where I started digging into stuff. So there's a lot of good books out there, I can't remember the guy who wrote it. You might know it. He wrote a book called On Killing, another one called On Combat. And that started to point me in the direction of, how serious this business could be, what I might find myself in front of, what I might deal with. And I actually don't love the term PTSD and how it's like a bunch of symptoms that you can check a box for yes or no. Because some of them are beneficial in my opinion. Like there are things on that list of symptoms that I have that I wouldn't want to trade away.
Hypervigilance probably one of them.
Yeah. So the way I pay attention out in the world or sit in a restaurant or whatever, I don't want to think that the world is a big scary place, but it's also not all good all the time. So I'm happy that I've trained to pay attention to if this vehicle's been behind me for 3 turns and what it is. You know what I mean? Stuff like that where I'm aware because of the training and experience I have. I wouldn't trade that away if I could, but it's labeled a symptom of PTSD.
Yeah, something like, you mentioned sitting in a restaurant as one of them. It's kind of good to be able to see the whole restaurant,
of course,
instead of just having, people turn to your back where you can't see anything or what's going on, right?
Yeah.
If something does happen, the guys who are able to see everything, they're going to have a better chance of survival than the people who are, just sitting at the bar with nothing, with everyone thing to their back.
Well, it's just the basics of self-defense. Just step rule number 1 is not become a black belt of something. It's just pay attention to what's going on around you and then avoid it if you can.
Yeah. And so let's get maybe into the techniques that you utilize. So what did you find were the more useful techniques for, saying not developing PTSD or not developing, so-called trauma through these experiences?
Well, I think it's the same tools that are just beneficial in anyone's life, anywhere. It's, there's things like your physical health is obviously tied to your mental health. So if you have a good a workout routine and you're persistent with that makes you better capable of handling stress. I'm a big fan of journaling. So just getting out what's inside. And I think that's why I really like songwriting so much is it's almost an extension of that, the creative work, and just, you can write down shit that's in your brain and you get it out. And through that, I think it helps to process it. And then meditation. I'm a huge fan of any practice. You don't have to call it meditation, call it whatever you want, where you're back to a present moment. Because in the present moment, it's fucking impossible, pardon my language, to
So, okay, you can swear on the
be
podcast.
anxious or depressed or anything. Like if I were to hand you a piece of ice, and like, what does that feel like? In that moment where you're just presently feeling the cold of that ice, you will not have anxiety. You will not have depression. It can't infiltrate the present moment. So meditation, I just look at it as a good practice for coming back to the present moment. And the more you practice it, the more you can do it in a day. And even if it's just 5 minutes of your day where you're completely present, that's 5 minutes of your day where you're not anxious, stressed, depressed, thinking about something, worrying about something. And if you can build that to hours and hours of your day, it just gets better and better.
Let's just maybe chat about the journaling for a second, then maybe we'll chat about the meditation. So the journaling, like, is that something, again, that you incorporated before joining or after? And like, what was your practice like? Was it something that you did daily or just after a big event, or how did you incorporate that?
Yeah, it's kind of been off and on. I think it was early on in my military career I started doing it. I wouldn't say it was before, and I still do it now, and I try to do it almost every day. And for me, it's changed a little bit. When I was in, it still always kind of starts the same. And for me, that's thinking about things and writing down some things that I'm grateful for. And then there's like a focus or manifestation part of it where it's like, what is it that I want out of anything that I'm doing? And reminding myself of that and putting it in there. Because I think focus is a very powerful tool that is underutilized by human beings. So you focus on what it is you want. And then the rest of it was just kind of freestyle. Like, what was I feeling inside? And now for me, that looks like I write stuff through the lens of a songwriter, where I'm writing it. It's freestyle. No one's ever going to read it. It might never become something. I might get a good line for a song, but it's just that practice of getting out what's inside for me now, with the framework of it potentially being a song at some point.
And so when you were in the military, like, did you journal every day, like every night, or how often were you doing it?
Yeah, there's parts where I would go every day, and sometimes I wouldn't do it for a week and like wouldn't beat myself up over it. I'd be like, okay, get back into the journal. When I was deployed, mostly it was every day or sometimes twice a day. Like, you can kind of get into a rhythm, or, where you're like hitting the gym, you're doing journaling, you're reading books that are good for your brain and perspective, and then you're doing the job. And at home, some of the responsibilities get you a little more busy, but I try to do it every day.
And so in terms of the journaling itself, like, you just do it freestyle. Like, some people use like the 5-minute journal, and there's probably some other journals out there that I'm not aware of, but you would just basically just do it freestyle and write down like what you were feeling, what your thoughts are, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, I kind of almost half stole the framework from the 5-minute journal, because it starts with what you're grateful for. It starts, then it goes, I believe, it might not be the right order, but affirmations and like what you want to have in your life, and a kind of a manifestation portion. And then I don't know what's after that, but for me, the freestyle part worked pretty good. Just
awesome. And then in terms of like the meditation, is that something, again, that you sort of did like, freestyle, so to speak, or were you using apps, or, was it something that you would do isolated? Like, how would you, like, what was your overall meditation practice? Like, what would that look like?
Yeah, I've done all of it. I've used the apps. I've used, mantra stuff, candle meditation, all of it. I think and I mean, I'm not a meditation expert, but I think the more you can bring yourself back to the present moment for a split second or for an hour, just the better your day is. And if you can practice that, with almost a goal of being present 24 hours in a day. I mean, you can't do that because you sleep and dream, and you also have to think and plan about the future. But if the more you can be present, the less anything is going to creep up on you in terms of past experiences or guilt or harms or future worries.
And in terms of, meditation and journaling, like, some people who are into those things are also into like tracking things. Like, I'm not sure if you're like, an aura aware or things like that, or really into like your heart rate. But when you were doing these things, did you find that like your heart rate lowered, or did you have any like objective measurements that you were looking at, or was it mostly just, you were kind of just going off how you feel?
I used an aura ring for quite a while, until I was like getting competitive with myself for a score. I was like, this is not maybe doing the right effect. Wake up and be like, oh my God, how did I sleep? What was my score today?
I'm
And it
guilty of
was,
that sometimes.
yeah, and it was almost like, we were just talking about Mark Sisson before you got on, where it's just do the things that are good most of the time and kind of chill out and find a good balance. That's what for me now, it's just how I feel kind of dictates what I do.
Okay, awesome. And then, so, we've talked about obviously the meditation, the journaling, and you said there was a couple of good books that you read as well. So, did you find that reading kind of influenced you and, prepared you more for war and for what was to come in the army?
Oh yeah, hugely. Like books about the reality of war and what happens psychologically were like a good addition to what I was reading. But then I was reading things like, spiritual books and things that help with perspective.
Do you mind sharing the names of those books? Or
Oh, not at all. Like Buddhism Without Belief is a fantastic book. A New Earth is incredible. These are like my favorite. I really liked Ego is the Enemy was a great one.
That's one of my favorites too. I love Ryan Holiday's books, but
yeah.
Go ahead, keep going.
So like those three were the top, and I would just from those kind of branch off to other books and see if it resonated or if there's lessons in it for me. And I was just always reading or, podcasting too, quite frankly, would be up there on the list where, people are sharing perspectives and guests come in and just...
Yeah, the only two people where like as soon as they write a book or I'll buy it will be Ryan Holiday and Jordan Peterson. Again, like podcasts, it's so easy to like, listen over reading and, because you can do it while you're driving, working out, that kind of thing. Reading, obviously you have to, sit down and you're basically just dedicated just doing that one thing, which is, not as convenient, but certainly, it's better to some degree because, that's where I think there's a little bit more like synthesizing in that sort of way. But, still, you can learn, I think, almost just as much through, audio things as well. And also, reinforces the point.
I'm more like reading physical books for like the stillness practice of it. Because, our whole day is like these 15, 30-second clips, moving on, listening, trying to be maximum efficient. While I'm running, I'm also listening to an audiobook. I'm also whatever, got an IV with vitamins. Like we try to maximize everything. Where I like the simplicity and stillness of just like sitting in the sun and reading a book,
Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of, like I don't use the Kindle. I like, books with a hard cover. And, it's funny we're talking about stillness because that's probably, my second favorite or maybe even more over than Ego is the Enemy. Stillness is the key. You're laughing. So you probably,
that's a good one.
Know that one too. I agree. There is something about reading that kind of like puts you in the moment. And I always find too, like, if I read for a half hour, an hour, like I just feel, for lack of a better word, like still or more chill afterwards. Like I just feel better. Whereas like you may not get that from, listening to something on audio because, you're driving at that time. So you're not, again, still for lack of a better word, which is kind of interesting. So when you were in the military, like, did you find that some of these other guys were like, potentially didn't believe in the stuff that you were doing, and then they sort of suffered more mentally, being like, oh, you don't need to read books, you don't need to do journaling, meditation, like that stuff's not really, effective overall? Or are most people, kind of like, yeah, like this is something that, I think is going to help me too? And did you feel like you sort of influenced some of your other peers in the military?
I'm sure I had influence on some guys, but there's definitely examples that you're speaking of where it's like, what are you doing, you fucking hippie? And then like, and now I see them and I'm like, oh man, I just wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now. Oh, for sure. Cause it's not necessarily a tough guy thing to like go walk around barefoot, it's like sit in the grass in the sun and what are you doing over there? Like meditating, you gotta kind of, I'm super glad I did. And I didn't really care. I was like, I think that this is going to be my best path through all this to the other side. And honestly, this is the calmest I've ever been internally in my life. And it's really great. And actually it's something I'm trying to put words to pass it on, if there's lessons in there somewhere to people that are struggling with just always being restless inside or anxious,
Yeah, I think that as we get older, hopefully for most people, like, they seek more like peace than say like power, and I think that's maybe some like conflict maybe in the military is like, so maybe some of those guys who are trying to like, out alpha others for lack of a better word, are always, trying to be more, powerful, but in reality, what's better is just kind of finding like, eternal peace, like maybe not eternal peace, but trying to find like, daily peace as you found.
Yeah, I mean, there's balance. If you're war fighting, you got to be powerful. Like you got to be aggressive. You have to be powerful. Going into situations where these guys have guns and explosives and they want to kill you, like you gotta step off the truck or out of the chopper or whatever, and you got to be a beast in your mind. Like you can't have any doubt, and you have to be ready to give her. But you can't be in that state all the time. That's like, when it's done and you're back at your fob or whatever, just chill out.
And so, coming back to, the term PTSD, there's also the term, PTG or post-traumatic growth. And, we can all think of people, whether even in the army or whether it's through like, a bad childhood or even just, some kind of traumatic event where, after that event, they actually got stronger. And so, in your opinion, like what was a big difference between people in the military who would experience PTSD versus PTG?
I think that everybody experiences PTG. They just don't see it or label it as such, and they should. Like that's a positive label. I think that, and it doesn't have so many check symptoms or is not as studied as PTSD. I like if you go to war and you come back, there's a ton of things that can have the potential of just making you a better person, perspective, and all these things. You get to see the spectrum of human behavior and emotion and things like. And I've always thought of it this way: like as I sit here right now, there's horrible shit happening in the world. It's still happening, whether I'm seeing it with my eyes or participating or not. It's still happening. It's almost like, we like to have our head in the sand because it's a sunny day here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm relatively safe just sitting in here. But like that stuff's still happening. So I didn't want to, for me, have it eat up my whole life feeling terrible just because I was there witnessing it versus being somewhere else not witnessing it. And that was one perspective that helped me a lot. But I think like you get through something, you're stronger anyway. And it's literally just a perspective thing, in my opinion.
And so when you chat with your friends now, like, the guys who are, struggling versus the guys who are not, like, what do you see being like the big key differences in what they're doing now versus maybe what they were doing, say before?
To be honest, it's prescription drugs and it's a victim mindset.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that. So, what kind of victim mindset do you think these guys have, like in terms of, coming home from the military and, potentially just sort of, self-isolating, which I think is one of the biggest issues.
Yeah. So there's isolation. There's all these doctors and people telling you constantly that you have this terrible thing called PTSD, that you've been through so much. Here's some drugs that are going to help you, which make that cycle worse. In my opinion, I'm not a doctor, everybody, but in my opinion, like that's what I see. I see a bunch of people telling you that here's all the things that's wrong with you, and here's a pill that'll help. You're like, that's not helping. Well, here's some more pills that'll help that pill help and take care of these. And it's just, you look at the people in the worst states of mental health, and they're surely on a bunch of prescriptions, and it's a terrible cycle. It seems to be anyway. In my opinion.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree with you. I've, like I said, like we were chatting before the show, I've, dealt with a lot of veterans who've come to my practice, and, I'm not someone who's, big on handing out prescription drugs to veterans and to anyone for that matter, just because, I'm not saying that they don't have their place and that they're not an effective tool in certain circumstances. Yeah. They absolutely are. I'm not like anti-drug, but I don't like the idea of like, I have PTSD, therefore I'm going to have PTSD forever, and therefore I'm going to have to, take these drugs forever. And so is that sort of the mentality that you feel that a lot of the people who are struggling have?
Yeah, I just think they don't. I think most people focus on the negative side of it instead of looking at what growth has happened in your life because of what you've been through, the characteristics of who you are, and just there's so much benefit to experiencing the wide range of human experience and emotions, in my opinion. That it's not all bad, but we only hear about the bad stuff, especially getting out of the military, like psych assessment, doctor appointment, and just like, holy shit, there's so much, and it's always to the negative. You know what I mean? They're not like, oh, sick, you can move really well and you're fit. Like, no one cares about that. They care about, the bad things. And I get it. That's what we're being assessed for. But I think that sneaks into people's heads and it makes them feel like a victim of something, versus, stronger and better for what they have gone through.
And just like pharmaceuticals can be a tool for certain people, I believe cannabis can be a tool for certain people as well. But do you feel like some of the guys have kind of overused cannabis and are now using it as a crutch overall?
Oh, I'm sure that happens. Yeah, definitely. I love cannabis, man. I think it's a really good tool. If I find CBD to be super beneficial for me. If I'm just ever feeling like, okay, I'm not present right now, I'm feeling jacked up, some CBD drops, be like, oh, that's pretty chill. And I love honestly, the feeling of when I'm high on THC. Like you add that to meditation and you take it to another level. But yeah, I'm sure I've definitely seen some people overdo it. I'm not extremely productive when I'm stoned. So I can't imagine being like that all day long. I wouldn't get anything done.
And did you find that, when you came back overseas, that was when you needed to use a little bit more THC versus now that, you're a singer songwriter in Nashville and, you got a family and this kind of thing? Like, do you feel like you don't need to use it as much?
I think that everyone's life has pressures, and we don't always, I don't think we do a good enough job of recognizing that. It's like, that person's job is way more stressful. And sure, getting shot at can be pretty stressful. But the person who's, down here working on this building over here has a bunch of stresses in their life too. And when you leave a job like that, it's not like all the stresses and pressures of life just go away. So I don't know. I think it's a useful tool at any point if you use it properly.
And so, would you be okay with, say, guys using it every night for sleep? I think that, for people who are suffering from nightmares, using a little bit of THC is good. And I always advocate, for the most part now, everyone is different. You got to tailor the program to each individual. But for the most part, I try to get guys just to use CBD during the daytime and then try to use, THC and CBD at night, and always in a combination as well, if possible, just because, unfortunately, THC is medicine. You can build up a tolerance fairly quickly. And so, it quickly can go from 0.5 gram a day to 1 gram a day to 3 grams a day to 5 grams a day. And then, eventually, you go 1 to 3 hours without using THC and you get all kind of irritable and that kind of stuff. So in terms of your approach, for yourself, maybe we were chatting with your buddies, you kind of let them know, listen, this is a great tool, but try to focus more on, CBD, particularly in the daytime to, so you don't slow down your productivity, and try to use the THC more as a tool for, say meditation, sleep, or just kind of relaxation in the evening time.
Yeah, I think with any of it, including prescription drugs, if it's helping you, if it's actually helping you, then use it how you need to. Do you know what I mean? I think that not it's disguising something or someone's telling you it's helping you. If it's actually helping you, then just use it how you need to. With the view of just with the goal of being as healthy as you can. That would be my that would be how I assess all of it. Do you know what I mean? If I'm just taking too much THC and my testosterone's crashed, I have no drive to do whatever, anything in life and fitness, yeah, I'm not feeling too much stress, but like, is that really helping me? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And the same goes for prescription drugs. If there's something that you're like, yeah, this helps me, I'm becoming a better person because of this. Fuck, give her.
Yeah. And like, I'm certainly not, this isn't medical advice or anything like that, but I try to, advocate for people to, take a 3-week break every year if they can. Now, for some people that may be very dangerous because, during that break, they may have, like a psychotic episode or just go crazy or, get like really bad symptoms and go back into a really dangerous state for maybe themselves and maybe even put others at risk. But overall, I think, when you have that break, then you're sort of forced to use some other coping mechanisms. And I think that can be helpful as well. So I think incorporating, other coping mechanisms besides the THC and besides, even CBD to some degree can be helpful for some people, just because if you're only relying on that one coping mechanism, I don't think that's as healthy as, being able to rely on several coping mechanisms. Like you've already talked about, meditation, journaling, a little bit about physical fitness, which maybe we'll get into more in a little bit. But, my approach and what I tell people is you don't want to rely just on one coping mechanism to, alleviate your overall symptoms.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that most people don't start with even trying to optimize circadian rhythm or, evening screen time and all of, nutrition and when you eat before bed and just like the stuff. There's tons of information out there how you can structure your day to optimize your sleep. If we're talking about, having trouble sleeping, like start with that. And if you need some help, then, dig into other things.
Yeah. So talking about other things, maybe this is a good thing to get into. What about psychedelics? What about MDMA and, psilocybin or magic mushrooms? Like, are these things, and, feel free to not answer this question if you are uncomfortable, but like, are these things that you've, experimented with before, or have had some success with, or maybe some of your other friends have had success with?
Yeah, for me, man, psilocybin has been massively, massively beneficial. Like I said, I'm not a doctor, but I think that every adult in modern society should take a massive dose of psilocybin once a year, twice a year. Like, I think everything would be better in society if that was the case. I've had some of the most profound days of my whole life on just like a mega dose of psilocybin. Now, I haven't really gotten into the micro dosing. I've tried it a couple of times. I haven't gotten into like the flow of it, like you're supposed to. There's like a formula. You take a little bit of this, 3 days, 4, whatever, a couple of days off. I haven't really gotten into that. I think maybe it would help with songwriting, and I don't really, I'm not a big, like, I like to take mushrooms and whatever, go party. But for me to sit alone with my mind and tackle the deepest, darkest corners of it, like 5 to 7 grams of mushrooms will get you there.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know who Dan Carcillo is. You probably do because you're a hockey guy. He won Stanley Cup with the Chicago. You don't.
Okay.
He won a Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks. He was on Philadelphia. Actually, ironically, the year they played Chicago in the final and lost. But anyway, he he's been through a lot of trauma in his life. He's been on the podcast before, and he was suicidal. And he did what we call a heroic dose, or what Terrence McKenna calls a heroic dose, which is 5 grams. Some people always like to go 6 to 7 just to kind of be safe, to make sure they kind of get there. And he did his in like a dark in a dark room in his basement. Like, some people like to do it out in nature. Like, for yourself, you like to do it by yourself? Do you like to do it with others, like with a therapist? You like to do it in nature? Like, what do you think was the most beneficial way for you to do it?
Yeah, well, the first time I did it was just in my living room. I just kind of sent the family out, and I'll be come back in like 8 hours. We're gonna see what happens. I've only ever done it by myself, and I think that was important for me at the time. And I would be open to doing it in more of a guided or ceremonial type of way, or with other people now. I didn't know what it was going to do to me the first time, so I was a little concerned. Like, I'd been in special operations for 16, 17 years. I know how to handle myself. Was it going to make me crazy? Like, was I going to fight everyone around me? Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. So I just took it by myself and just kind of really meditated and tried to get into, I didn't really do too much I didn't want to read too much about other people's experiences before I did it, but I had heard that setting was important, so I just kind of tried to have a chill place and a bit of an intention in my mind. And it brought me places I never thought you could go. But again, the most profound, like, I've done it, I think 3 times with big doses solo. And all 3 times have been extremely valuable and extremely profound.
And so these experiences, like, afterwards, like maybe not immediately afterwards, and maybe you can talk about it immediately afterwards as well, but, throughout the next weeks to months, like, what did you feel was beneficial about the experience? Did you just feel like it made you calmer overall? Did you feel like you had new perspectives on things? Like, what was, like, specifically, I guess, was, so helpful about it?
Kind of both. But I also think that, like, why I think people should do it, every year is, like, life still builds up after. So you get this really clear, or sometimes not that clear, but you get all of these different perspectives. And then, you get back out there and you're on your commute and someone's still cutting you off. And, like, life just comes back, and the stresses of life. And I think it's like almost a good cleanse of the mind. And so a lot of guys I know are afraid to do it because the deepest, darkest parts of your mind are going to come visit you, or might. I don't know, maybe not for everyone. For me, they did. And it's like the scaredest I've ever been, the saddest I've ever been, the most remorseful, but then also the most ecstatic and most, just seeing beauty in things. Like, for me, like roller coasters, but really getting into my mind and stuff that's sitting there, unprocessed, or just needing to have light shined on it.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're describing is, what a lot of people will call it like a reset kind of thing. But, like you said, though, before, like, you can reset your computer, reset your mind. But if you just go back in doing the exact same thing, then, your life isn't really going to change. So, you need to, once that reset is done, then you need to, start to change the behaviors that, were affecting you poorly before, and start doing, different behaviors afterwards. Because if you just, reset yourself and go back into, the exact same kind of life that you had before, you're going to go back into the same, dark places, the same habits, that kind of thing. So even though it breaks the habit, it doesn't form new habits for you. Like, you have to do that yourself.
Yeah. You almost have a blank canvas to start, painting on again. And if you're just painting with the same brush, for lack of a better analogy, you're going to get the same thing. And I think the days after it, that's where I did a lot of journaling and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, what was that about? And for me, the first time I did it, I was really struggling with a loss in my life. My brother passed away, and I was like, after all the stuff, all the, the deploying and the war stuff, I thought I had a pretty good grip on, like, how to process, difficult things in life. And when my brother passed away, I was like, holy shit, I don't know how to process this properly. And, like, I just found that psilocybin was massively helpful. It was like a light switch went off on my first trip, where I had so much sadness, and just grief that was immediately gone.
And by getting into the psilocybin, like, was it someone in the military who suggested this to you, or was it, listening to, like, Joe Rogan or a Tim Ferriss or Andrew Huberman podcast? Like, what?
Yeah, I think it was actually Kyle Kingsbury podcast.
Okay, Kyle. I've chatted with Kyle. I actually went to his house and did a podcast with him, I think, in 2020, and he's been on my podcast as well. So, anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just think it was his. I started kind of hearing about it, him and Aubrey Marcus and some of that crew. And I was like, I think this could be and I was like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, it can get pretty crazy. But.
I mean, yeah, you are right. Like, certainly, not everyone can have, a good experience, but when you compare it to, other things, it isn't as dangerous as some people, think to some degree in terms of
and it's
you know,
over in 6 or 8 hours, like it can be
yeah,
fucking scary. Like if someone was just watching me, they'll be like, he is not having a good trip. Like my wife would have probably called like the ambulance, but 6 hours later, I was like, wow, I needed that.
Well, I'm happy that you had, an awesome experience with that. And, maybe this is a good time just to bring up other, tools. So, JTF2, obviously you guys have to be, incredibly fit. You have to have a sharp mind, all these kinds of things. Do a lot of guys in JTF2, are they on TRT? Do they take peptides? Are they into, sort of like hormone optimization and this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's a good percentage. I've never done TRT, but I've used peptides probably 3 or 4 times, more in like when I would be recovering from an injury or something. I think they're amazing. Again, I'm not a doctor. Do your research and make your own decision. But like for me, I took like a stack of peptides that healed injuries that I didn't think were going to go away.
That's awesome. So I imagine some of them are BPC 157, TB 500. Some
that
of those,
combo right there, yeah.
That combo, yeah. There's that combo does seem to be effective for a lot of people. I mean, I was actually talking with that with Mark Sisson there this morning, and yeah, like we definitely need more randomized controlled trials on it. But like the anecdotal evidence for it is, seems to be quite high. So no wonder so many people have sort of taken it into their own hands, kind of thing, and are using them. So, in terms of, transitioning from the military to now being a very successful songwriter, were you inspired by guys like Jocko Willink, David Goggins, Tim Kennedy, like all these guys who, were in the army before and now have had some very successful careers afterwards? Or was it always that you were going to be a singer-songwriter after?
No, that was pretty new, actually. That was like when my brother died that I kind of really started thinking more about music and creative, like the outlet of writing songs for my life. And I decided then that I was going to do it. I mean, all those guys, they're great. I've only met a couple of them, but like, I think they're a little too intense for me.
David in particular, probably.
Like, I'm just like, well, when do you chill out, man? Like when I don't believe that it's good to be like, I'm up at fucking 4 a.m. because the enemy is, and I'm running 20,000 miles. But when do you chill out? Like, the message is like, you got to be intense all the time. And I almost couldn't disagree more than that.
No, I understand as well. Like, I mean, I work out every day, generally sometimes I take a day off here and there, but for the most part, I do think that, having the Goggins mentality all the time is going to lead to burnout. And I think he's had some pretty, severe injuries it is. And, I'm not sure about his overall longevity and lifespan and what he's going to look like. I'm not sure if he's in his late 40s now, something like that. But I don't know what his, decades are going to look like in his 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, So, I am, I do worry about his sort of like longevity and maybe, the effect that he has on others as well, because, it can be a little bit much sometimes. And there's only so much things like BPC 157, TB 500 can do, they do have a limit. So
stem cells.
So I wish all the best to David. And, I still think he's a cool guy, and I follow him on Instagram and stuff like that. But, I do think that, he may, be overdoing it to some degree. And I think a lot of people feel that way as well.
I don't know his day to day. That could be the part he puts out to the world also. Maybe the rest of the time he's just really chilling in the sun, which is great. If that's you're passing on that part of your life to the internet and to the public, I'm all for it. From the parts that I see, I'm like, that is far too intense for me. I really want to chill out more than that.
So, talking about intensity, we've heard, Navy SEALs go through this like intense training program. They call it Hell Week, where they have to do, a bunch of difficult tests to make it through. And, I think even Goggins, tapped out the first one or two times he did it, I believe. I think it was the water that really got him. He said, I think, I don't quote me on that. But what's the most difficult part of becoming a member of JTF2?
Yeah, man, it's all of that. It's all of that. It really pushes you. The funny thing is like, before getting into it, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like, it's all very secretive. So you just try and prepare as much as you can. And, I was in a battalion where guys would go to do we call it selection, and they'd come back like 2 days later. And I'm like, guys that were machines, like kicking my ass in PT. And I'm like, oh my God, what are they doing over there? And it just, the biggest thing was I went there, not as fit as lots of people. I mean, I was training hard, but some guys are just absolute animals. But I was like, I am not quitting for anything. Like, that's the one thing. If they pull me out, I get kicked out. Sure, if I get injured, even if I get injured, I'm not quitting until someone makes me quit. That was the one thing I like was dead set. And you find out that it doesn't matter how hard you train, you're going to get pushed past whatever your limit is. Because I think they want to see, are you going to quit? Are you going to quit? Quit. You should quit. You should probably quit. You don't belong here. You know what I mean? And you're just like beat down to a pulp, and you're like, oh, fuck, maybe you're right. And that was the one thing I wasn't going to let creep in. It somehow worked out.
So it's not, I mean, obviously the physical fitness aspect of it is, incredibly difficult, but it seems like it's more like the mindset. It's like they want to know whether or not you're going to be a guy who quits or doesn't quit.
That's right. Well, it's a mix. So it's breaking down a person physically to see what's really underneath it mentally. Because, you can be the most mentally strong person in the world. If you're standing there fresh, you feel great, you're fit, you can do, you run a fast mile and do 1 million pull-ups. As soon as you're broken down physically, then that shows, what kind of mental stamina you have under there.
And then when you're in JTF2, like, is their training too still exceptionally difficult? Like, is there something, within the program? Like, do guys, get to JTF2 and then quit within the program because they just find that like it's not sustainable because of whatever it is that you guys have to keep up?
Yeah, for sure. Especially the core. Like, once you get through selection and you're doing what we call the assaulter course, it's still like another year of just intense physical, mental, the tasks, the learning, the skills, like all of that stuff. A ton of people quit after passing selection. And then even once you're in the unit, it's more, and I think this is through the selection process, but it's more guys that push themselves. You know what I mean? It's not the type of people that get there and need someone to tell them, hey, do your job, like get better at your shit. Instead, it's like every individual, work out in the morning for a couple hours, do the fight training, go to the range, go to the CQB, work on all the skills with comms and vehicle and insertion and medical training, and then just like stay late and shoot more pistol, and then finally go home and start that all again in the morning until you deploy. Like, it's guys that give her. So it's more, it's a very competitive place too. Do you know what I mean? Like any sports team or whatever, where it's just like, I can't not work hard if this guy is working like that. And then you go, and it's just, and it makes it's very intense, but it makes everyone really good at that job.
So obviously you guys do a lot of like tactical training, but I'm really curious about like the hand-to-hand combat. Like, do you guys do any like wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu? Like
all of it, yeah.
You guys do all that stuff, yeah. So
it's look at it like a UFC gym, but we also incorporate, guns and knives, like weapons, because we're, in places where we use weapons, like that.
Was there any guys who did like the Tim Kennedy thing, like they were, really good in the military and then they tried to transition over to the UFC or anything like that, or not so much?
We had some guys that would do fights, like semi-pro stuff or fights outside of work, but not normally. Most of it was like, and when you get the bug for something like jiu-jitsu, you might want to pursue it outside of work to do the belt system or whatever. And that happens with all kinds of stuff. Like when you start doing para insertions, some people are like, oh my God, I love free fall. I want to be like a tandem person or, a camera guy in the air or whatever. Just any one of those lanes you go down, if you shoot a lot of pistol, you're like, I love it. Guys want to go do like IPSC on the side. So it was like that for kind of MMA and jiu-jitsu stuff. But I don't think I don't know if you know who Devin Lorette is. He did it with arm wrestling, not mixed martial arts. But he's like the world champion arm wrestler.
Oh, wow. Cool. Yeah. I don't really follow arm wrestling, so I don't know who.
Me either. I just know him because I know him, but he's huge. He's like the world's fucking like super famous in arm wrestling.
That's insane.
After being in the unit. Yeah.
Do you do any training now? Any jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, or?
Yeah, I really like BJJ. I think it's really cool. I just like that it's almost like a puzzle you're solving instead of just doing something physical. I definitely don't do it as much as I would like to. I just got the contact for a gym down here in Nashville that I'd like to go start at. But the songwriting and music stuff, like it takes up like every portion of my day between the business and trying to get better at guitar and singing and writing songs and doing all of that stuff. It is my everyday, all day.
And I imagine you kind of mentioned earlier, but through like the, songwriting in particular, and maybe also just through the expression when you're, actually playing in front of people and that kind of thing. But do you feel like that's very like therapeutic for you? And do you feel like that's part of the reason, why you say have, PTG versus PTSD?
Yeah, I think the creative side of stuff is very beneficial, but I think it's just because I have a passion. Like it's a message I try to pass if I can give any piece of advice for people getting out of the military. Like I've been out for about 3 years, almost 3 years. Just find a passion, find something. Don't look back at what, reflect on what you've done for sure. It's probably amazing, but don't live there, find something that pulls you forward. And, it can be in anything. I think there's a benefit to being in creative work, especially after a military career, but just find passion. I made a post about this the other day. It's like, find passion, find a community and a sense of community, and then realize that all the skills that you develop to do a job like being in the military are beneficial moving forward. Like, it's not like all your good days are gone,
Yeah, I think it's really important that when you retire, whether it's from the military or any profession at all, like you have to have something to retire to. If you just, retire and you don't have anything to retire to, you're not going to have much meaning and purpose. And I think that's where people, start to abuse alcohol and things like that is, after their retirement. And I mean, I'm sure some guys get into it in the military, during the time to try to cope with trauma and stress and trauma and stress and that kind of thing. But like, if you don't have anything to retire to, then, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure to some degree.
Totally. I agree completely.
One thing that I wanted to chat with you about, and I only learned this, fairly recently, but so the Canadian Armed Forces has now set a goal for 25% female representation by 2026. And I think right now they're at like 16%. So, what do you think of that? And do you think that, some of the so-called gender ideology has kind of broke too far into the military? And is this something that you've, looked about or talked about with maybe some of your buddies?
I haven't really talked about it. I think why not 26%? Why not 24%? Why the fuck does that percentage matter? I think that I think first of all, we need to figure out what the hell our military is for. What are we doing? Because if it's to be an effective warfighting machine, we are not that right now. If it's just to employ Canadians to help out domestically, sure, we can do that. And then I don't think it matters what percentage of what. I actually, across the board, I don't think it matters. If more women want to join and they're capable of passing the tests and doing the job, perfect. If less women want to do it because it's more of a man-centric thing, then okay. Like these numbers confuse me. Like, where did they come up with 25%? And why isn't it 26? Or why isn't it 24? Or if you think it's so unfair, why isn't it 90% women? Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense. I think we have to figure out what we want our military to do, because it's not doing anything right now. Like, we're not an effective warfighting machine, and we're not just like a force that's helping across Canada. Like, I would be fine if our whole military, other than like one, let's say, special operations force that went and hunted actual really bad, ISIS and Al Qaeda, like the shitheads of the world. The rest of the military is like to help Canada. I'd be completely fine with that, because we are not getting invaded because our Navy is on the coast, like patrolling and bad at. That's not why we're not getting invaded. You know what I mean? Because our Air Force is out there just patrolling the skies with our badass planes. That's not why, everybody. So I think we're wasting a lot of money and resources not knowing even what we want our military to be.
So you don't have like a defined sort of like purpose for the military right now.
No, like go ask, what is it? If it's war fighting, then guess what? We don't give a fuck about gender. We want to know who's the best and the baddest at going overseas and closing with and destroying the enemy. If it's not war fighting, if it's something else, then let's just tell us what it is. Because right now, it seems to me like the military is a very confusing place.
Yeah, I mean, to me, regardless if it's a military or anything, it should be the best man or woman should get the job, and you shouldn't aim to, have a certain percentage of, one sex over the other, or one, race over the other, or whatever it is. It's always just should be, let's look at the purpose, and then the best man or woman should get that job, period. I think that's the best way to approach it.
I completely agree. And then if you're on the side of, what do they call it with the hiring, the diverse DEI or DEA, whatever it is.
I'm not sure what it is either, but I know
anyway, it's like, it's about trying to diversify, who's going to be what type of gender, how many transgender, how many this gender. But it's like such a weird slippery slope. You can't do it. Even if you say 25% women, then you're like, well, what about the other, I think there's like 1,000 genders. Where do they get their 25%? Are you saying that they don't exist? Because if that's the case, then why are you pushing this one side of the agenda? Like, it's all so weird to me. I think that, one, the military needs to figure out what the hell it is going to be for in Canada and what its purpose and focus is, and then build it appropriately from there.
So I know I only got you for another 5 or 10 minutes or Dallas, and obviously I can't have a podcast with you without talking about the shot. So, what was going through your mind when you were taking that shot, and, what really prepared you to be able to take that shot? And for people who don't know, Dallas did have a 2.2 mile shot, sniper shot that is, basically become, an internet sort of sensation to some degree. And so, just tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I was part of a 4-man sniper team. We were deployed to Mosul, Iraq. We were basically in this position to support an Iraqi push against ISIS. ISIS had kind of their last stronghold in Mosul. They'd been pushed back to where like the old city downtown was. And we had a position on the river that was elevated, a very good sniper position. And we had been in this OP for 50 some days on and off. Like, we would go in and then we'd be waiting for this push, and we'd be observing. If we saw something, we'd call airstrikes or fire. But we were waiting for this push to happen. And then when it finally did, so it was a 4-man sniper team, and I was a spotter on one of the guns. So it was shooter spotter team on this side, about 8 feet to our right was the other shooter spotter team. And that long shot, actually, what we were trying to do is shoot our 50s so that ISIS would go into a building, the group of them, because we were watching this battle in the street, and then we'd call an airstrike on them. So we did that, and the airstrike, it was like a dud missile, which I'd never seen before. And then so one of the guys came out the back side of the building, which was facing us, and he like drops his his chest rig. He's on the 2nd story, lowers his AK and drops it, and he like hangs off the balcony. So when we were doing that, I was squatting on this gun for my buddy Scott, and I was like, okay. Now we knew the city like the back of our hand at this point. So I gave him he's on this building. Here's your range. Here's your wind call. He gives me a standby. I say, send it. These guys are doing it at the exact same time. So the other half of our sniper dead. So we ended up doing something unintentionally, which is a simultaneous shot, which is a sniper tactic. We just didn't plan it. So it was like these 250 rounds go, and it's like a 10-second flight time. So the guy gets down, he's going to pick up his rifle, and the 50 round went right through his kind of side, almost where he'd hit a deer. And he obviously folds because it's a 50 and rolls down a hill. And I was like, hit. And Scott just like, it was like, holy shit. And then they call hit. And we're like, no, that was us. And then we moved to, immediately though, it was still going on. So I'm like, get on your gun, you target over here. Here's your wind call, here's a dope. But it was really slow in that position for like 50 days. And when that long shot happened, and the days, and the morning before that and the days after for like a week, it was every day for a week. We were like up in sniping guys. So it made all of that time worth it.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, 50 days is a super long time to be able to, prepare for that kind of moment. And did you feel too that like some of the other things that we talked about, like the journaling, the meditation, everything, like was that part of the reason why you think you were able to be so calm and focused to make that particular shot?
Well, I think we train really hard prior to going over there, and the team we were on was incredible. And every guy does it in their own way. But for me, yeah, man, I was in that, it was like at the top story of this like bombed out hotel. But like my routine was amazing. I'd wake up, I would still meditate, journal. I would go like suntan on the back patio. And like, then we would go do sniper shit. And then I would come back and I would really like, you're watching a lot. So a lot of it's just observing, a lot of it's surveillance. But then when you're not on shift, you have time to just like, what are you going to do? So I was like working out, suntanning and journaling and reading books. Like it was just, I was getting better. You know what I mean? Like it was,
yeah. So you were kind of in like your sort of like peak, like focus or mindset mode at that point.
Yeah. And it's like some of this stuff disrupts it. So like, I don't know if you ever shot a 50 cal, but it is not pleasant to shoot all day long. So like, I remember times we'd be sitting there and we just switch on and off the gun and spotting. That's how our teams would work. And like at the end of some of the days, we're like, everyone's looking at each other. We're like, are you brain dead too? And we're like, yeah. Like you can't think. And like, it's now we know that it's like an MTBI. So that many rounds is not good for your brain. And we'd like feel effects at the end of the day and then go into the next day and shoot more 50. And
like, did you ever hit anything like that in like practice before, or is that the longest ever like, practice, not practice?
I think that was longer than we were hitting in practice. But before we went overseas on that tour, we come down to Texas to train, and they brought this piece of gear called a prism, and essentially it just reflects an image. So when you're shooting 50, and at that distance, like this is exaggerated, but your gun has to be pointed up high for the trajectory to reach out that far. Now you'd imagine if you're looking through a scope, you're looking into like the clouds at this point. So shooter spotter communication becomes difficult. Now with a prism that reflects the image, when you're pointed up, you can still be pointed on your crosshairs at the same thing that the spotter is seeing. So when we saw this little piece of gear, we got like the first one ever made or whatever in Texas. And like, you guys want to bring it overseas? I said, yes. We were shooting and reaching out to way further than we've ever hit before in Texas. And it was actually before we went overseas, I told all of our chain of command down there, I was like, on this tour, I promise you we're going to break the world record. Wow.
Yeah. That's insane.
And then we did.
So they actually predicted it. That's incredible, man. Well, and then also too, you wrote a song about it after, right? Adios Amigos, right?
Yeah. Adios Amigo.
And then that's also too, when you released the video, is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, I know our hour is up there, brother, but just let people know where they can learn more about you, where they can learn about maybe your upcoming tour dates and then everything about your music and anything else you want to chat about.
Sure. Yeah. We're touring a lot this year. We got a lot of dates on the books all over the place. So you can go to my website, dallasalexander.ca, and then some version of Dallas Alexander on all social media, and you'll find me if I'm not shadow banned at that particular point in time. Awesome.
I know you're on Instagram and Twitter. Is that where you're most active?
Yeah, I would say I am Dallas Alexander on Instagram, Dallas Alexander on X, and Those are mostly, I try to keep up with YouTube stuff when we get good content from shows or whatever. I'm kind of on all platforms you can find.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your service. I certainly appreciate that. And thanks so much for, being on the podcast today and sharing all your insights. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back with another episode soon.